Here's something that might sting a little. The person on your team who closes the most deals this year probably isn't the one with the sharpest pitch. They're not the one who memorized the most closing frameworks. They're not the one who read the newest book on objection handling. They're the one who showed up every single day with a specific internal posture and kept showing up long after everyone else got bored, frustrated, or distracted. And if you think I'm about to tell you, just have a positive attitude and everything will work out, stop right there. That's not what this is about. What I'm going to walk you through today is the precise mechanism, neurological, psychological, and strategic, behind why attitude and habits consistently outperform technique. Not in theory, in the real world, in pipelines, in revenue, in careers that compound over decades instead of flaming out after 18 months. Let's get into it. Most people, when they want to get better at sales, or honestly, better at anything that involves persuading, influencing, or creating value for other people, they reach for technique first. They want the script. They want the template. They want the exact words to say when a prospect says, "I need to think about it." They want the 7-step framework, the magic question, the NLP trick, the perfect cold email subject line. And look, I'm not going to insult your intelligence by pretending technique doesn't matter. It does. If you're walking into a high-stakes negotiation and you've never thought about how to anchor a price, or how to reframe an objection, or how to structure a discovery call so you're actually learning something, yeah, you're going to get eaten alive. But here's the trap. Technique is what you do in the room. Attitude is what gets you into the room. And habits are what keep you coming back to room after room, month after month, year after year, even when the rooms are cold, even when the deals fall through, even when the client ghosts you after 3 great meetings. And here's what nobody tells you. Most people never get good enough at technique to see it pay off because they quit the process before the reps accumulate. They don't fail because their technique was wrong. They fail because their internal operating system, their attitude, their daily structure, their emotional resilience, couldn't sustain the volume of attempts required for technique to even begin to matter. Think about it this way. Let's say there are 2 salespeople. One has memorized 20 different closing strategies. The other knows maybe 3, but she makes 40 meaningful contacts a week with genuine curiosity and genuine care, and she does this every single week for 2 years without exception. Who wins? It's not even close. The second person wins, and she wins by a huge margin, not because technique is irrelevant, but because consistency of action is the multiplier that technique rides on. Without that multiplier, your technique is a sports car with no fuel. This is the mistake. People optimize for what happens inside the conversation, while completely neglecting what happens between conversations, the recovery, the preparation, the emotional regulation, the identity-level beliefs about what they deserve, what they're capable of, and what their work actually means. So here's the core idea, and I want you to really sit with this. Your ceiling in sales and in life is never set by what you know how to do. It's set by what you're willing to repeatedly become. Technique gives you a higher floor. Attitude and habits give you a higher ceiling. And the ceiling is what determines the trajectory of your entire career. Now let me explain why this is true at the level of your brain, because this isn't philosophy. This is architecture. Your brain has a system that most people have never heard of, even though it's running in the background of every decision you make, every opportunity you notice, and every action you take or fail to take. It's called the reticular activating system, the RAS. It sits at the base of your brainstem, and its job is essentially editorial. Your brain is being bombarded by millions of bits of sensory data every second. You can't process all of it consciously. That would be like trying to drink from a fire hose. So the RAS acts as a filter. It decides what gets promoted to your conscious awareness and what gets suppressed. And here's the critical part. The RAS doesn't filter based on what's objectively important. It filters based on what you've told it matters through your repeated thoughts, your emotional states, your goals, and most powerfully, your habits. This is why two salespeople can walk through the exact same networking event and have completely different experiences. One of them notices three potential leads, catches a comment that signals a pain point, and picks up on body language that tells her which person in the group is the actual decision maker. The other one sees a room full of strangers, feels awkward, grabs a drink, and talks to the one person he already knows. Same room, same people, completely different information getting through the filter. And what sets that filter? Not technique, not a framework you memorized last Tuesday. It's your habitual orientation, the way you've trained your brain day after day to look for certain patterns. If your daily habit is to think about how you create value for other people, your RAS literally tunes itself to spot value creation opportunities. If your daily habit is to worry about rejection, your RAS tunes itself to spot threats. That's not metaphor, that's neuroscience. Now let's layer on another mechanism. When you're in a sales conversation, or a negotiation, or a pitch, or even a casual networking exchange, your brain is essentially toggling between two systems. Your prefrontal cortex, which handles strategic thinking, empathy, long-term planning, and creative problem-solving, and your amygdala, which handles threat detection, fear, defensiveness, and the fight-or-flight response. Here's the problem. These two systems are in a constant tug-of-war, and the amygdala is faster. It's evolutionarily older. It was designed to keep you alive on the savannah, not to help you navigate a complex B2B sales cycle. So when a prospect pushes back, or says something that triggers your insecurity, or asks a question you don't have the answer to, your amygdala can hijack the conversation before your prefrontal cortex even gets a chance to respond. And when the amygdala takes over, all your technique goes out the window. You can't access your closing framework when you're flooded with cortisol. You can't read the room when your own nervous system is screaming at you to protect yourself. You can't ask a great follow-up question when your brain is busy composing a defense. This is why attitude, by which I mean your baseline emotional regulation, your relationship with discomfort, your practiced ability to stay present under pressure, is more important than any script. Because attitude determines whether your prefrontal cortex stays online during the moments that matter most. And this isn't something you can just decide to have. You can't just say, I'm going to be calm under pressure, and have it happen. This is where habits come in. Your emotional regulation capacity is a function of your daily practices. Sleep, exercise, reflection, structured debriefing after difficult interactions, intentional exposure to low-stakes discomfort. These are the things that literally strengthen the neural pathways between your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala, giving you faster, more reliable access to your higher-order thinking when the stakes go up. There's one more piece of the neuroscience I want you to understand, because it explains something that confuses a lot of people. It's the dopamine prediction system. Most people think dopamine is about pleasure. You close a deal, you get a hit of dopamine, you feel good. That's a massive oversimplification. Dopamine is actually about prediction and anticipation. Your brain releases dopamine not when you get the reward, but when you predict that a reward is coming. And critically, it releases more dopamine when there's uncertainty about whether the reward will actually arrive. This is why sales, at its core, is one of the most psychologically demanding professions on the planet. Every interaction has uncertain outcomes. Every pipeline is probabilistic. You're living in a constant state of maybe, and your dopamine system is going haywire trying to predict. If you don't have habits that stabilize this system, daily routines that give you predictable small wins, structured review processes that help you see progress even when deals aren't closing, practices that decouple your self-worth from any single outcome, your brain will start doing one of two things. Either it will flood you with anxiety, pushing you into frantic, desperate activity that repels prospects. Or it will crash your motivation entirely, and you'll find yourself procrastinating, avoiding calls, and telling yourself you need to do more research before you reach out to anyone. Neither of those is a technique problem. Both of them are habit problems, and both of them will destroy your results regardless of how sophisticated your sales methodology is. Now let me elevate this, because what I've just described at the neurological level maps perfectly onto some of the most powerful strategic thinking frameworks that exist. Naval Ravikant has this concept of specific knowledge, the unique intersection of your skills, your experiences, your obsessions, and your personality that can't be trained into someone else. And one of the things Naval says that most people gloss over is that specific knowledge is often found by pursuing your genuine curiosity, not by following a market trend, not by copying someone else's playbook, but by going deep into the things you actually care about in the way that only you would approach them. Here's how this connects to what we're talking about. Your attitude, your genuine orientation toward the people you serve, your real curiosity about their problems, your authentic desire to understand their world, that is part of your specific knowledge. It can't be faked, it can't be scripted, and it can't be replicated by someone who's just running a technique. I've seen this in my own work. I build AI-powered systems that help salespeople grow, not just close more deals, but actually develop as professionals and as human beings. And one of the things I've noticed, working with salespeople at different levels, is that the ones who break through aren't the ones who master a new closing framework. They're the ones who develop a genuine relationship with the process itself. They start to find the daily work intrinsically interesting. They get curious about why a particular prospect said what they said. They start treating every rejection not as a failure, but as a data point. They build a daily practice of reflection, not because someone told them to, but because they've discovered that the reflection itself makes them sharper, more present, and more effective. That shift from "I'm doing this to get the reward" to "I'm doing this because the process itself is making me better," that's not a technique, that's an attitude, and it changes everything downstream. Charlie Munger has a framework that's relevant here too. He talks about mental models, the idea that you shouldn't think about the world through one lens, but through many. And one of his most powerful ideas is inversion. Instead of asking, "How do I succeed?" ask, "How would I guarantee failure?" and then avoid those things. So let's invert. If you wanted to guarantee that a salesperson would fail over a long enough timeline, what would you do? You'd make sure they had no daily structure. You'd make sure they took every rejection personally. You'd make sure they measured themselves only by closed deals, never by effort, learning, or relationship quality. You'd make sure they isolated themselves, never asked for feedback, and never reflected on what went wrong in a structured way. You'd make sure they chased every shiny new technique instead of getting deeply good at the fundamentals. You'd make sure they optimized for short-term wins at the expense of long-term trust. That's the failure recipe. And notice, not a single item on that list is about technique. Every single one is about attitude and habits. Munger also talks about the Lollapalooza effect, when multiple psychological tendencies converge on the same direction and create an outcome that's far more extreme than any single factor would predict. In sales, the Lollapalooza effect works like this. When someone has the right daily habits, those habits produce emotional stability. Emotional stability produces better presence in conversations. Better presence produces more trust. More trust produces more information from the prospect. More information produces better solutions. Better solutions produce higher close rates. Higher close rates produce more confidence. More confidence produces better habits. And the whole thing spirals upward. But the Lollapalooza also works in reverse. Bad habits produce emotional instability. Instability produces poor presence. Poor presence produces distrust. Distrust produces withholding. Withholding produces bad proposals. Bad proposals produce rejection. Rejection produces worse habits. And the spiral goes down. This is why two people who start with the same technique, the same product, the same territory, and the same market can end up in radically different places after 2 years. The divergence isn't in what they learned, it's in what they practiced every day. Let me connect this to the concept of creative flow, because there's a massive misconception here that's destroying people's performance. Most people believe that motivation comes before action. They think they need to feel confident before they can sell. They think they need to feel inspired before they can create. They think they need to feel ready before they can start. This is backwards. The neuroscience is unambiguous on this point. Action precedes motivation. When you begin a task, even reluctantly, even without enthusiasm, your brain starts to engage. Neural circuits activate. Dopamine begins to flow, not because you feel good, but because your brain detects that you're moving towards something. And that dopamine then produces the feeling of engagement, interest, and yes, motivation. This is the mechanism behind creative flow. Flow is not something you wait for. Flow is something you manufacture through structure. You need a clear task. You need a challenge that's slightly beyond your current skill level, not so far that it triggers anxiety, not so close that it triggers boredom. You need immediate feedback. And you need the ability to shut out distractions. Now apply this to sales. A salesperson who waits to feel confident before picking up the phone will never pick up the phone on the days that matter most, which, by the way, are the hard days, the ones after a string of rejections, the ones after a deal falls through at the last minute, the ones after a bad quarter. But a salesperson who has built the habit of picking up the phone at 9:00 a.m. regardless of how they feel, who has structured their morning so that the task is clear, the first call is always the easiest one, and the review happens at the end of the day, not during. That person will generate their own motivation through action. They don't need to find the feeling first. The feeling finds them because they started. This is what I mean when I say that confidence isn't about believing in yourself. That sounds nice, but it's useless as an instruction. You can't just decide to believe in yourself. Real confidence comes from a very specific place. It comes from not caring about the outcome of any single interaction, and instead caring about the quality of your daily process. When you're fully invested in the process, the individual outcome stops mattering so much. And paradoxically, that's when your outcomes get better, because you're relaxed, you're present, you're genuinely curious, and you're not carrying the stench of desperation that prospects can smell from a mile away. Let me talk about what happens when you try to fight this with technique alone, because I see this pattern all the time and it's painful to watch. Someone goes to a sales training, they learn a great framework, they come back fired up. For 2 weeks their numbers go up, then the excitement fades. The old habits reassert themselves. Their numbers return to baseline or drop below it because now they feel worse, because they've proven to themselves that they know what to do but can't sustain it. And what do they conclude? I need more training. So they go to another seminar, they read another book, they learn another framework, same cycle, spike, fade, baseline, despair. This is what the research on deliberate practice tells us is the critical difference between people who plateau and people who keep growing. Anders Ericsson, who spent his career studying expert performance, found that the difference wasn't talent and it wasn't technique. It was the structure of their daily practice. Experts in every field, musicians, athletes, surgeons, chess players, all shared one thing. They had built systems for practicing at the edge of their ability, with immediate feedback, and they had the psychological resilience to sustain that kind of practice over years, not weeks. In sales, deliberate practice looks like this. After every significant client interaction, you debrief. Not how did it go? That's too vague. Specific questions. What was the prospect's actual concern beneath their stated objection? What did I miss in their body language or tone? Where did I talk when I should have listened? What question would have opened a deeper conversation? What assumption did I walk in with that turned out to be wrong? And you don't just ask yourself these questions in your head while driving home. You write them down. You track patterns. You notice that every time a prospect mentions budget early, you tense up and start justifying price instead of exploring value. You notice that your best meetings all start with a personal connection that lasts at least 3 minutes before any business is discussed. You notice that you consistently underperform on afternoon calls and your best work happens before noon. These are the micro insights that compound over time, and they only emerge through structured, habitual reflection. No technique seminar will give them to you, because they're specific to you, your market, your personality, your tendencies. This is also where AI comes into the picture, and I want to be specific about this because I think most people are using AI wrong. They're using it to generate scripts, templates, and email sequences, which is fine, but it's surface level. The real power of AI in professional development is in the reflection layer. An AI system that can analyze your daily interactions, help you identify patterns in your own behavior, challenge your assumptions, and simulate different approaches, that's not a shortcut. That's a practice partner. That's the equivalent of a tennis player having a ball machine that adjusts to their specific weaknesses. I built a system that does exactly this for salespeople because I saw the gap. There are a million training programs that teach people what to say. Almost nobody is helping people build the daily discipline of examining how they think and how they show up. And the daily discipline is where the real edge lies. Let me give you a concrete scenario because I want this to land in your actual life, not just in your head. Imagine two people. Both of them sell enterprise software. Same product, same market, same price point. Both of them have been trained on the same sales methodology. Person A is technique-focused. She's read every sales book. She knows Spin, Challenger, MEDDIC, Sandler, all of them. She can recite objection-handling frameworks in her sleep. But she has no daily review practice. She doesn't track her emotional patterns. She sleeps inconsistently. She checks social media between calls. After a bad meeting, she vents to a colleague for 30 minutes and then moves on without extracting any lesson. She measures herself exclusively by revenue, so a bad month sends her into a spiral of self-doubt. Person B knows the basics. He can run a competent discovery call. He asks decent questions. His closing technique is nothing special, but every morning at 7:30, he spends 20 minutes reviewing yesterday's conversations in a structured format. He writes down one thing he did well and one thing he wants to improve. He identifies one insight about a prospect's real pain that he might have missed in the moment. He does 15 minutes of exercise before his first call because he's noticed it brings his nervous system into a regulated state. After a rejection, he gives himself 60 seconds to feel the sting, and then he asks, "What would I do differently if I ran that conversation again?" He tracks his weekly activity, not just outcomes, but inputs. Calls made, questions asked, follow-ups sent, relationships deepened. And he reviews his numbers monthly, looking not just at revenue but at conversion rates at each stage, because that tells him where in the process he's actually losing people. 6 months in, Person B is outselling Person A by 40%. And Person A can't figure out why, because she knows more about sales than he does. Here's why. Person B's habits have given him 3 things that Person A's technique can't provide. First, emotional regulation. Because he has a daily practice that stabilizes his nervous system, his prefrontal cortex stays online during difficult conversations. He doesn't get hijacked by his amygdala when a prospect pushes back. He stays curious instead of getting defensive. Second, pattern recognition. Because he reviews his interactions daily, his brain has accumulated a massive database of micro-patterns. He notices things in conversations that Person A misses, because his RAS has been trained through repetition to look for them. Third, compounding trust, because he's consistent in his follow-ups, in his energy, in his genuine interest. His prospects experience him as reliable. And reliability is the single most undervalued currency in sales. People buy from people they trust, and trust is a function of consistency over time, not charm in a single meeting. Now I want to address something that's lurking beneath all of this, because if I don't, you'll walk away with only half the picture. There's a deeper reason why people reach for technique instead of building habits, and it's not laziness, it's fear. Building a technique is an intellectual exercise. You can learn a closing framework in an afternoon and feel like you've accomplished something. It gives you the illusion of progress without requiring you to change anything fundamental about how you operate. Building habits, on the other hand, requires you to confront yourself daily. It requires you to look at your own patterns, your avoidance, your self-deception, your inconsistency, and do something about them. That's uncomfortable. It's not glamorous. It doesn't make for exciting content at a sales conference. Nobody's going to give a standing ovation for, "I wake up at the same time every day and review my calls in a spreadsheet." But that's exactly the point. The things that actually produce transformation are almost never exciting. They're boring, they're repetitive, they're invisible to everyone except you. And that's why most people don't do them, because there's no immediate external validation. This connects to something Naval talks about that I think is profoundly important. He says that all the real benefits in life come from compound interest, and compound interest is just a fancy way of saying small, consistent actions over a long time. Your habits are the interest rate of your professional life. A tiny improvement in your daily practice, compounded over years, produces results that look like magic from the outside, but are actually just math. And the reverse is also true. A tiny daily deterioration, skipping the review, sleeping poorly, numbing out with distraction after a hard day instead of processing it, compounds into a slow erosion that you don't notice until you're 2 years in and wondering why nothing has changed. Let me connect this to something broader, because I think it matters for everyone watching this, not just people who carry a sales title. In an era where AI can generate a pitch, write an email, build a presentation, and even conduct initial prospecting, the technical side of sales is being commoditized rapidly. The skills that AI can't replicate are exactly the ones we've been talking about. Emotional regulation under pressure, genuine curiosity about another person's world, the patience to build trust over months instead of trying to close in days, the daily discipline to show up with energy and intention even when no one's watching. These are not sales skills. These are human skills, and they're becoming the only skills that matter because everything else can be automated, templated, or outsourced. If you think about your own career, whether you're in sales, engineering, design, consulting, medicine, education, whatever, the question is not, do I have enough skills? The question is, am I building the daily operating system that lets my skills actually express themselves consistently? Because most people don't have a skill deficit, they have a consistency deficit. They have an emotional regulation deficit, they have a self-awareness deficit, and no amount of technique will fix a deficit at that level. This is also why I think the framing of selling yourself is so important and so misunderstood. Most people hear sell yourself and they think it means self-promotion. Put yourself out there, post on LinkedIn. Build a personal brand, and some of that's fine, but the real meaning of selling yourself is much deeper than that. Selling yourself means translating the value that exists inside your head, your knowledge, your judgment, your perspective, into outcomes that other people can benefit from. If you have insights that could help someone, but you never express them, they're worthless. Not to you, to the world. And honestly, to you too, because knowledge that never enters the exchange, that never gets tested against reality, never gets refined. It stays theoretical, it stays fragile, it stays small. So the act of selling is actually an act of growth. Every time you put your ideas in front of someone, you're testing them, you're refining them. You're learning which parts resonate and which parts don't. You're building the feedback loop that makes you genuinely better, not just at communication, but at thinking. And this brings us back to habits. Because the willingness to put yourself out there consistently, not once when you feel inspired, but daily as a practice, that requires a level of emotional resilience that only comes from habitual training. You have to have built the capacity to be rejected, to be ignored, to be misunderstood, and to come back the next day and do it again. That capacity is not a personality trait. It's a skill, and like all skills, it's built through repetition. There's a principle from the Talmud that I think captures this beautifully. It says that a contract is sacred, but the most important contract is the one you make with yourself. In the Jewish business tradition, your word is everything. If you say you'll deliver, you deliver. If you make a promise, you keep it. Most people think about this in the context of external commitments, deals, partnerships, agreements with clients. But the most violated contract in most people's lives is the one they've made with themselves. They tell themselves they'll wake up early. They don't. They tell themselves they'll follow up with that lead. They don't. They tell themselves they'll review their numbers this weekend. They don't. And each broken self-promise doesn't just lose them a task, it degrades their self-trust. It teaches their brain that their own commitments don't mean anything. And when your brain learns that you can't be trusted by yourself, it starts to undermine you in subtle ways. You hesitate before acting because, unconsciously, you don't believe you'll follow through. You set smaller goals because you've already proven you won't hit the bigger ones. You lose that internal authority that radiates outward in conversations and makes people want to do business with you. This is the mechanism behind what people vaguely call confidence. It's not an affirmation, it's not a feeling, it's the accumulated evidence that you do what you say you'll do, even when no one's watching. And that evidence can only be built through habits, through small, boring, daily commitments kept. So here's what I want you to actually do, not eventually, not someday, this week. First, design your morning, not the whole day, just the first 90 minutes. Choose 3 non-negotiable actions that you will do every single morning before you engage with the world. Mine includes structured review of yesterday, physical movement, and 1 creative output, even if it's small. Yours might be different, but they need to be specific, time-bound, and non-negotiable. If you can't commit to 90 minutes, commit to 30, but commit. Second, build a daily debrief practice. Every evening, spend 10 minutes answering 3 questions in writing. What did I do well today? What's one thing I want to improve tomorrow? What did I learn about someone I'm trying to serve? Write it down. Don't just think about it. Writing activates different neural pathways than thinking. It forces precision. It creates a record that lets you see patterns over time. Third, track your inputs, not just your outputs. Most people only measure results, revenue, deals closed, responses received. Start measuring the actions that produce results. How many meaningful conversations did you have this week? How many follow-ups did you send? How many times did you ask a question you were afraid to ask? These are the leading indicators. Revenue is a lagging indicator. By the time your revenue tells you something's wrong, it's been wrong for months. Your input metrics will tell you weeks earlier. Fourth, choose 1 emotional regulation practice and do it daily. It can be exercise, it can be meditation. It can be breath work, it can be journaling. I don't care which one. What I care about is that you do it daily, because the research is overwhelming. Emotional regulation is a trainable capacity, and it decays without practice. Just like a muscle, you don't get to go to the gym once and stay fit forever. Fifth, once a week, review your patterns. Not your numbers, your patterns. Where did you avoid discomfort? Where did you take a shortcut? Where did you break a commitment to yourself? Where did you grow? This weekly review is the meta habit. It's the habit that improves all your other habits. And it's the one that most people skip because it's uncomfortable. Do it anyway. There's a line from the Talmud, from the tradition of people who have understood commerce and knowledge and long-term thinking for thousands of years, and it goes something like this: the highest form of wisdom is kindness. And in the context of what we've been discussing, I'd translate that to: the highest form of selling is genuinely helping someone else grow. Because when your daily habits are oriented toward service, toward making other people's lives better, toward solving problems that actually matter, toward showing up with consistency and integrity, you don't need tricks. You don't need manipulation. You don't need the latest framework from the latest guru. You become the kind of person that people seek out, recommend, and return to. And that's not built in a single conversation. It's not built with a single technique. It's built in the 1,000 invisible moments where nobody was watching and you chose to do the work anyway. Technique can win you a deal. Attitude and habits can win you a career. And if you're paying attention, you know the difference. The people who get this, who build the daily operating system instead of chasing the next shortcut, they're the ones who compound. Slowly at first, then suddenly. Not because the universe rewarded their positivity, but because they built a machine of attention, reflection, and consistent action that made excellence inevitable. That's not motivation. That's engineering. Your technique is what you do in the room. Your habits are what you are. If this made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave your thoughts below and come back. There's always more to build. Here's a question I'd genuinely like you to answer in the comments. What's one daily habit you've been meaning to start but keep putting off? And what's the real reason you haven't started it yet?